My name is Martin Matter with the Witness to War Foundation. It's April 12, 2024, and we're at the VFW post in Falcon, Colorado. I'm sitting with Mr. Bill Gessner, Gessner, served in the United States Navy during the Vietnam War, attached with the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines. How are you doing today, Bill?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Glad to hear it. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. My first question today is, where are you from originally?
Originally from a little town, Coventry, Rhode Island.
All right. Tell me about growing up. What were your folks like?
My dad was a hospital administrator, and my mom was a stay-at-home mother, and grew up on a lake. It was a great place to grow up, really. Forest behind the house, and go fishing, go boating, go swimming in the summer every day. In fact, from June to September, I probably only wore a bathing suit most of those days.
Now, was there a military history in your family at all?
My two grandfathers served in World War I. They didn't know each other, but coincidentally, they were in the same field artillery battalion, and they were both wounded in the same battle in 1918. My dad was 4F due to vision and could not serve in World War II, but he was, had a draft physical and tried to enlist and all that, and they kept rejecting him. So, but not a huge military family history.
So was joining the service something that interested you growing up, or did you have other ambitions?
Well, I was fascinated by stories that my best friend Dan Kane's uncles told us when we were boys. They both served on the same destroyer in World War II, and they regaled us with stories of the South Pacific and meeting pretty girls on tropical islands. And so the Navy was in the back of my head, but I can't say it was an objective of mine initially. Yeah.
So tell me how you came to join the Navy yourself.
When I finished high school, college was not on the table, and my dad said, you need to get out of the house, get a job. Not move out, but need to go, not stay home and go swimming every day, but get a job. And so I got a job working for Lebanon Manufacturing in Warwick, Rhode Island. And it was the worst possible first job for a kid. It was in the molding room. The temperature was like 120 degrees. And my job was to take these plastic light sockets, wheel them over to the shaker, lift them up, throw them in the shaker, turn the machine on, and then after it finished doing what it was doing, wheel them to another spot where they got packaged. And doing that for 8 hours a day, it got old. So after about a month, I decided I hated it and I wanted to quit. And I talked it over with my friend David, and I said, I think I'll join the Navy. It was just kind of a spur of the moment thought. I went to the recruiter. I was still 17 at that point in time, so he told me I had to wait either to get my dad to sign or wait till I turned 18. I decided not to tell my dad. I'm not sure why, but I waited till I was 18 and then signed the papers and then went home and told him I was going.
And this was 1965?
1965, yes. Yeah. And
so there was a little bit of rumblings in Vietnam. Did you know anything about that country or what was happening there when you enlisted?
I was pretty clueless, frankly. It wasn't an altruistic enlistment. It was, let's get away from this awful factory job. And I'm not sure I had any idea what I was getting into. On that vein, when my dad took me to the train station in Providence to go to Boston to be enlisted, we said goodbye, and then I looked out the window and I saw him weeping on the platform. And it impacted me a lot because I had never seen my dad cry before that moment. And I think he must have had a better idea what I was looking at than I did.
So did you go to Illinois for training?
Yes, went to Great Lakes, Illinois for basic training. And I was in Company 279. Because in high school, my phys ed teacher made everybody learn drill and ceremony because they said you were going to get drafted or going in the military, and we did. I was one of the few guys that did, so they made me the recruit company commander. And I led the basic training company throughout basic training. And during basic training, I took the general qualifications test, and I scored really high on it. And so my, I forget the right word, my platoon leader, guide, drill sergeant, if you will, came and said, you know, we don't think you should go be a bosun's mate or a gunner's mate in the Navy. With your test scores, you should be either a yeoman, which is like a secretary, or a hospital corpsman, which is a medic. And just simply based on the fact that my dad had been a hospital administrator, I chose to be a corpsman, clueless as to what really what might entail at that time.
And they trained you guys to be corpsmen down in Texas, is that right?
Now they do. At the time, there was right across the street from the basic training in Great Lakes, Illinois, where Hospital Corps School was. And so I graduated from basic training and started Hospital Corps School at Great Lakes. And it was there I met a guy I'm friends with today, Neil Downey. He was also a hospital corpsman in training. And we've been friends ever since then, and stayed close, actually, since then. Yeah.
Did he go to Vietnam as well?
He did, and we ended up flying from Boston to San Francisco together, flying from San Francisco to Okinawa, going through jungle warfare training there, and then into Da Nang together, on to Phu-Bai in the 3rd Marine Division together. And we got split there. He went to the 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, and I went to the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines. And we tried to talk the personnel people into putting us together, but they said that both battalions needed help, so we ended up in different places, which was probably a good thing for both of us. You know, not having a close friend right by is probably a good thing.
Absolutely. So in between enlisting and your deployment to Vietnam, obviously the war really ramped up. And what do you remember about those years of, you know, watching people get deployed, you know, people coming back, KIA? What do you remember about those years before going to Vietnam?
Well, you know, honestly, it wasn't a big presence in my mind or my life. How it affected me was after Hospital Corps School, I went to Newport Naval Hospital in Rhode Island for what they call B-level training, where you're learning and practicing the things that you learned in the basic classes. And I was home on leave for 10 days in August, and I got recalled from leave. They cut it short and said, you have orders now to go to the Fleet Marine Force training at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, because there'd been a big firefight in Vietnam and a bunch of corpsmen had been killed and wounded, and they needed replacements. And so that was the first time that the Vietnam thing really came up and hit me in the face. So both Neil and I got orders. We went to Camp Lejeune. Camp Geiger, actually, was where field medical training was being conducted. And as we completed the field medical training, they said, there are 2 things here. You can volunteer today to go to Vietnam, or you can volunteer to go on a Mediterranean deployment with the 2nd Marine Division. And by this point, being smarter than I look, I chose to do the Mediterranean deployment, and so did Neil. And we both got assigned to the 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines, and went on to a 6-month-long deployment in the Mediterranean, which in my mind saved my life later. You know, there's a big difference between what you learn in basic training, what you learn in advanced infantry training, if you will, which is what we did at Camp Geiger, and actually doing it in the field. And the 6-month deployment with what today is called a MU, a Marine Expeditionary Unit, we were loading up tactically, getting on landing craft, assaulting the beach, and then deploying and training in the field for days at a time. And I learned where I should be in the formation, you know, not in front, not in back, somewhere near the middle. And we were playing with blanks and things, and so we got to hear gunfire, if you will, and react to it. And I learned a lot about how to be a hospital corpsman in a field unit with the Marine Corps.
How to operate under stress and work as a team. Yeah.
Right, cold, wet, tired, hungry, and doing the job, you know. Things that you don't catch in the initial training phases.
I've been very fortunate because a lot of guys never got anything like that before they got sent to Vietnam.
Right.
Well, in the interest of time, tell me about when you got your orders and how you got to Vietnam.
Okay, the orders came in the summer of 1967 with an order to report in October to Treasure Island in San Francisco. And so we went, Neil and I both went back to New England. He's from Boston originally. And we did our leaves, and we had planned to meet at Logan Airport and fly to San Francisco together. And we did. We deliberately went a couple days early so that we could have one last wild weekend in San Francisco, if you will, before we flew. We went from there to, on a Braniff Contract Airlines flight to Okinawa. In Okinawa, we got issued jungle utilities and got all kinds of shots, preventative jungle kind of stuff, and did a 3-day jungle warfare school, which was basically just making yourself more miserable before you went to Vietnam. It was raining and muddy and nasty, and I don't think I learned anything there, frankly, but it was part of the deal. Then we loaded up on a C-130, and that's not the way to go 800 or 900 miles. We were sitting in webbing seats in a cold, flying at about 10,000 feet, freezing on our way in, landed at Da Nang. Got off the aircraft there. We were told we were going to 3rd Marine Division, and we spent one night in Da Nang, then flew to Phu Bai. At Phu Bai is where we were told we were going to be split, with Neil going to 1-4 and me going to 1-9. I left immediately. He had a couple of days to wait, and I didn't see him again until July of 1968. Didn't know what was going on with him. I got to Dong Ha, which is where the 1st Battalion 9th Marines headquarters was. Got equipped with flak vest and load-bearing equipment, got my personal weapon, and they put me on a truck and drove me at like 50 miles an hour from Dong Ha up to Con Tien.
So 1-9 now has a reputation for the amount of casualties they endured throughout the Vietnam War. But when you arrived, did they have any such reputation? Or what was it like being the new guy over there?
Well, those are two different questions. 1-9 had already received the designation The Walking Dead by the time I got there. And it originated with Hanoi, Hannah, who was broadcasting about the, quote, atrocities that the 1st Battalion 9th Marines did with burning huts when they first got there in 1965. And they vowed, the North Vietnamese Army and the VC vowed to kill everybody in 1-9, and that was what Hannah was preaching at the time. And so we already had the reputation. And as an aside, it really was true. We experienced the time that I was in the battalion from November through the end of May of '68. We experienced over 100% casualties in terms of strength versus casualties. Not, there were replacements, so it wasn't really 100% of the people were wounded or killed, but the battalion experienced over 1,000 casualties in that 8-month period, which was a lot. And we had suffered a lot of killed in action. So anyway, the first day we get off the truck, and I'm Joe Clueless, frankly. They literally grabbed me and hustled me into a trench line and into a bunker. And like seconds after we got into the bunker, artillery rained down on us. They had been targeting the trucks coming up and timing it to try to catch the resupply effort of people and equipment with enemy artillery. Because Con was within range of the 152 millimeter cannons that were in the North Vietnamese side of the DMZ. While I was in there, I got assigned to Delta Company, and they led me down to the Delta Company area. And while I was there, the Delta Company really took no casualties in Con while I was there. But Alpha Company had a bunch of casualties, and I got sent over to help Alpha Company treat casualties on, I don't know, the second or third day that I was there. And that was very eye-opening. It changed this from being a John Wayne movie to being real life, and that people were dying and being seriously injured. It was difficult, the first death. You know, I didn't really know how to respond to it. But, you know, you did it. And after that...
I wanted to ask if medevacs were constantly in and out during that time, or if that was something you had a hard time getting.
Well, at that point in time, the medevacs were more or less scheduled. We were littering the casualties from the front lines to the battalion aid station, which was in the bunker on the reverse slope at Con Thien. And then they would call them up, and they came. They were pretty readily available. That was my observation. I can't say that as a bona fide fact, but as far as I know, people were getting treated pretty quickly at that point in time.
Good deal.
Yep. So at the end of November, beginning of December, the timing for me is sometimes not exactly. I'm bending down.
Yeah, sure. Feel free to use your notes as you need.
We were relieved on Con Thien and participated in Operation Kentucky, which was a battalion-sized sweep of the demilitarized zone north and west of Con Thien. And it was eerie moving through that terrain. It was all former banana plantations, and so it was kind of open, low, with jungle, real jungle around the plantations that you move through on trails that were very narrow, and the jungle was very dense. And while we encountered snipers and an occasional skirmish during Operation Kentucky, we were in no real combat. I mean, anytime you get shot at, it's combat, but it wasn't a firefight, so to speak, right?
Was this area littered with booby traps at all, or was it mostly cleared?
I didn't encounter any booby traps in that area. I can't say that anyone else did. Then from when we completed that sweep, we were moved down to the vicinity of Camp Evans, which I'm not exactly sure where to place that for you on the map, but the battalion was split into various company responsibilities that we rotated throughout the month of December and scheduled for the month of January. And in that time frame, I got into my first real firefights. The company was out on a sweep near Camp Evans, and we were ambushed by a VC group that had automatic weapons, and they attacked us as we were going down this trail that bordered a big stream, not quite a river, from the opposite bank. And so one of our platoon stayed in contact, and the rest of the company moved upstream, and we inflated our air mattresses and went across the stream floating on air mattresses for those that couldn't swim to get to the other side, and then counterattacked back down and destroyed the whole VC group. There was about 7 enemy that we destroyed in that fight. Yeah. And so, I mean, I came under automatic weapons fire in that, and there were no injuries in my platoon in that fight, but there were injuries in the company from that one. But that was my first real firefight where, everybody was shooting at once and confusion reigned. But
a successful counterattack under all that pressure.
Yep.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And then another story from that time frame that we had a different mission. We were on Camp Evans at that time, and we were doing mine clearing operation between Camp Evans and the next installation. And we came under sniper fire from this village that was off the trail. So our company went into the village. Another company surrounded it, put what they call a cordon around the village, and we searched the huts. And so Sergeant Blackwell and I were a team, and he and I were taking turns going into the huts. We'd call the residents out of the huts, keep them under guard, and the other person would go in and search the hut. And we'd done that 3 or 4 times without incident. Then Blackie went into a hut, and I'm watching this little old lady and 2 young women, and all of a sudden I hear pop, pop, pop. It's a .30 caliber rifle going off inside the hut. So I squat down, and this Viet Cong comes out of the hut running with the rifle, and I have my .45 pistol, and I emptied the magazine at him, and I hit him in the lower leg, and he went down, and we captured him. And he was interrogated by the ARVNs that were with us, and we found that there were 2 NVA officers hiding in a cave under the riverbank there that we captured that day as well. So that was a pretty wild experience and a pretty productive one.
That's a pretty brazen behavior for a lone VC to take shots like that.
Well, he was, I found out later that he had hidden in one of the rice baskets. And he didn't expect that anyone would look for him in there. And then when Blackie pulled the lid off, he just pulled the trigger. Didn't hit Blackie, but so lucky in that count.
No kidding. Before we talk about more operations stuff, so I'd love to hear about some of the men in the platoon that you're serving with. Obviously, you're getting replacements every now and again, so it's changing. But who sticks out from your time with either Delta Company or helping with Alpha Company?
Well, it's one of the natures of it being 56 years ago, and the fact that it hasn't been a presence in my mind all this time. But I don't have a lot of names on my fingertips. Sergeant Blackwell, he and I shared a foxhole for 77 days, and we operated together in Camp Evans area. He was a squad leader, and he and I were good friends. And as far as I know, he survived the war, which is good. Then our platoon guide was a guy named Grubb, last name Grubb. Sergeant Grubb had been wounded 5 times when I met him. And he was wounded again at Quezon. Not life-threatening, but you get shot once, that's a lot. You get shot 5 times, that's a lot. Those are the 2 main guys from my 2nd platoon days that I have strong memories of. There were 2 other corpsmen that I became close with in Delta Company, and Dave Wethington. He and I had been in hospital corps school together and gone different ways, and then we met each other here again in Delta Company back in 1967. And then Charles Boynton, joined Delta Company as a replacement in, I want to say late January of 1968. And those guys are vivid in my mind because they were killed later. And by the time that they were killed in action, I was already the senior corpsman in the company, and so they were my men. And it was harder for me to lose them than even the Marines that I was close to, which may sound odd, but those were difficult. And then the other personality that was large was our company commander. His name was Frank Schaefer, Shafer. And he was the company commander when I joined in November '67, and he led the company through the end of March of 1968 when he was killed, which was a very difficult day. It was the hardest day for me in Vietnam. There were other days that I was more scared. There were other days where there was more danger. But that was the most depressing day, March 30, 1968.
Sounds like Commander Schaefer was a hell of a leader. What sort of qualities did he have that made an impact on you like that?
Well, he led from the front. He was conscious, though, about deploying his men in as safe a way as possible to accomplish the mission. It's a very difficult thing to balance that. It was something we recognized, though. The men in the company loved him because, he didn't go running into straight at the machine gun. He'd flank it like we did with a river crossing. He went upstream, crossed the river away from the enemy, and then attacked back. He'd made decisions like that, which were successful, but also minimized the danger to the company. Yep, I still get a little emotional when I think about Captain Frank Schaefer. He's a hero to me.
Well, I appreciate you sharing his story with me. I think it's important to try and remember these guys as often as we can and keep their memory alive.
Me too.
So you said he was killed in March, and April was Quezon?
No. So in around January 21st or 22nd of 1968, we were out on a combat patrol outside of Camp Evans, and briefly, in that firefight, one of my Marines got wounded, and I had the company put down covering fire. I ran out to where he was. I dragged him into a depression, and I treated him. And then I started a plasma unit in his IV, and when I went up to hang it on a limb in this little thing, enemy fire just raked the area. And it was the first time that I was consciously aware of being targeted, which is a whole different thing than being, bullets are flying around, there's one thing, but when they're shooting at you, it becomes a way more personal moment. So that was a very intense moment. So I bandaged him, and it turned out it was just what you'd call a flesh wound in the field. It's pretty serious anywhere else. I said to him, "Look, this is pretty hot right here. Do you think you can run?" And he said, "Yes." So I called back, and I had them put down a base of fire, and the two of us ran back to the cover that was maybe 50 feet or 60 feet from where we were. Right after that, we got the medevac helicopter in for this guy. We got a call to stand by to evacuate the whole company by helicopter. And today, if you watch movies and stuff, you think helicopter flight was routine. Well, it was not routine in 1968 for the Marine Corps in particular. And so we got lifted out of the field at Camp Evans, brought back to the airstrip at Camp Evans. Excuse me. I land, we get off the helicopters, and the whole battalion is organized on the airfield. And people are coming over, they're bringing us more ammunition, more food, more bandages, additional plasma things, and you knew something was going on. You didn't know what. And eventually we got loaded up on helicopters that same day. I'm sorry. That's got to be terrible on the mic.
No, it's all right. We can edit all that.
And we ended up getting on CH-53 helicopters, which are huge. and never been on one before that moment. And they flew the entire battalion, load after load, from Camp Evans up to the Quezon airfield. We got off the helicopters, and like at Cantien, we were guided to hustle off the airfield at Quezon into the trench line, and then the helicopters would take right off, and then the enemy artillery would land right just basically as the helicopters were leaving. And we put the whole battalion in helicopters and flew them from Camp Evans to Quezon. It was remarkable for the moment in history. Spent one night there, and then one night got the responsibility for a ridge line to the north and west of the main combat base at Quezon. And nobody had been up there, and so we moved the next morning through deep elephant grass out to, and we assaulted the hill not knowing if the enemy was there or not. They were not. And we established a battalion-sized perimeter on this ridge line near, just with the west of what's called the rock quarry at Quezon. And we set up there, we started preparing defensive positions there, and we went from 0 to a full-fledged defense to include wire and mines and trenches and final protective fire designations and range cards and all kinds of things. It was amazing to go from 0 to that. It didn't happen overnight, of course, but the defensive positions were very, very good by the time we left it.
Now, for the people at home who might not understand much about it, Quezon is tactically disadvantageous for you guys, is that right?
Well, it depends on one's perspective. At the time, it paralleled the main valley floor that led into northern South Vietnam, and the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong were using that as a supply route for battles in northern South Vietnam. It branched off from the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was along the Laotian border. Quezon was within artillery range of both Laos and North Vietnam. And so it was an important point for the war from both the North Vietnamese position of resupply and the American position of denying that resupply. And, the figures vary over the years over what happened, but the official American position at the time is that we probably tied up between 10 and 20,000 North Vietnamese army people by being in this blocking position along that supply route. And the threat was that they would attack and take us out to open that supply route. And so that went on for 77 days. And during that time, we did a number of combat patrols. I was in a number of firefights, and our Alpha Company had an outpost, a reinforced platoon-sized outpost just to the north of our position that got hit by a battalion of North Vietnamese regulars. And that firefight lasted from before dawn till almost noon, at the end of which we defended that position. I observed a guy who I thought should have got the Medal of Honor. I was watching him through binoculars from a trench line on our position. He ended up getting the Navy Cross for what he did that day.
What did he do?
He was moving from one position to another, holding the one half of the perimeter from being overrun. He was shooting with his pistol, throwing grenades, and you'd see him move to another spot so that they couldn't focus there, and he'd do it again. And he was rallying other troops to help him. You could see that the people would pop up where he was, and they'd help, and then he'd move to another spot, and different people would pop up where he showed up. But he got the Navy Cross for that. The next 2 days, one of our duties was we went down and we picked up the NVA bodies. We loaded 300 enemy dead onto trucks to be hauled away, because you couldn't leave them on the battlefield because we were still living there. And the Alpha Company platoon, reinforced platoon, there were like 54 people on that hill, and like 24 were killed and like 20 wounded in that fight. But to think that 50 defended against roughly 500 attackers, because some of them got away, obviously. Yeah.
I've heard they were pretty efficient at pulling their own men off the battlefield very
Yeah.
quickly.
But they weren't able to do so because we were able to provide support from where our position was. They even brought tanks up that day. That was the first time I was involved with tanks in battle. Was at Quezon. They brought up to our position and they helped in that fight.
Okay.
Yep.
But I've heard a lot of tales of misery from Quezon, just from the sheer amount of time you had to be engaged in battle. Could you tell people, what was going through your mind after weeks and weeks of being out there fighting and trying to survive?
Well, it was a question of taking care of your troops, and it was taking care of yourself, being smart. This is a simple thing, but you learn not to go to use the porta potty. It wasn't a porta potty. It was just because the snipers would take shots at you if you were taking a poop. So you went at night. You didn't poop during the day, or if you did it in a trench line in a sea ration box, and then took it up to the commode afterwards, after it got dark. So you thought about doing things like that. We had shortages of water and food. Food wasn't a big issue for me because I didn't eat everything anyway, and so I'd save what I didn't eat, and I ate that when we didn't get rations. And water, as a corpsman, I made sure I washed my hands every day. I kept my hands clean. And in the command group, we shaved every day, no matter how little water we had. We would all shave from the same helmet. There was about 8 of us that would share one helmet full of water and shave every day. And the discipline was really good. You get tired of we got artillery fire every single day that I was there. And it was sometimes closer to you than other days. But I had a 120 millimeter mortar round land less than 6 feet away from me, but I was in a bunker, fortunately, and all it did was give me a headache.
I had one man tell me, just after so many artillery close calls, I don't want to say complacent, but it just stopped bothering him after a while. Just the one that's going to hit you is going to hit you, and there wasn't much you could do about it.
That's a true statement. You learn very quickly the difference between outgoing and incoming, and you also learn very quickly which ones were coming close and which ones weren't. You never hear the one that kills you because it's coming straight at you, and but you learn when that you had to get down and when you had time to run to a hole to get down. The sounds were that different that you just began to recognize that. We were averaging several hundred rounds of incoming artillery every day, with a max of 1,200 rounds one day on our position. It's a lot of incoming.
Now, as I understand, you guys were getting air support from things like Puff or the B-52 arc fighters, is that right?
Yes, the combat support in the area was unbelievable. President Johnson ordered Operation Niagara, which was B-52s would fly over the Quezon Valley and drop 500-pound bombs down on suspected enemy locations. And they were also known as arc lights when the B-52s came. We had an observed enemy force of about regimental size, maybe 1,500 men, near the Quezon main combat base, and they adjusted fire on the arc light that night, and it landed within 1,500 meters of our position. And it was crazy, the vibrations from hundreds and hundreds of explosions going off so close. Flashes of light and
I'd imagine you could feel the heat coming off.
You could feel the heat, and you could feel the vibrations. It's like maybe like an earthquake might feel. The ground was trembling. It was crazy.
I can only imagine.
Yeah. And then
And Puff.
and Puff, we saw Puff operate as well, which is I think it was a C-47 equipped with a chain gun and a 105 millimeter cannon that would fly a circle around the enemy and shoot. You'd see that at night, and it was entertaining because you knew they were killing the bad guy. And it didn't involve you, so it was a little bit like a show. So that was an entertaining element, really. So the first night vision devices were deployed up there. They weren't really very good, but I got to see them. They were kind of like an old TV screen about the size of a basketball hoop and green. And but that was when technology was beginning to become part of the battlefield. And they had listening devices as well that they dropped out on the avenues of approach. And those didn't really work too well either, because it could be a dog going by or a human going by. You had no idea what it was.
Very primitive stuff.
Very primitive stuff.
I've heard the VC would, find them and then toy around and, fake intel.
Yeah, I can't speak to that, but that wouldn't surprise me. So
you said you spent 77 days with Sergeant Blackwell. Any memorable stories between you two over at Quezon?
The most memorable story between Blackie and I at Quezon was in the initial day. We were digging our fighting position, and he had other duties as a squad leader, and I had other duties as a corpsman. I was up in the command group with the head corpsman at the time, and we were building the company aid station, for lack of a better description. And then after working there for half of the day, I was going back to my fighting position, and we got a mortar attack. And so I jumped into the fighting position, and I landed on something soft and squishy, and I knew that was wrong, so I jumped out. When the mortar stopped landing, I called the Blackie and said, "Look, there was a cobra in our fighting position." I must have landed on its head or something, but when we looked at it, it was up like this, and so Blackie threw a hand grenade into the hole and killed it, and we flipped it out into the bushes.
Wouldn't risk it with those snakes, man.
Yeah, there were a lot of snakes in Vietnam, but that was my only close encounter with one, thankfully.
So tell me about coming off Quezon after those 77 days. What was it like getting out of combat after all that time?
Well, it wasn't getting out of combat. On April 4th, we moved out as a battalion and attacked south of the Quezon Road to Hill 471. And the NVA was entrenched there in a battalion-sized defensive position. And our battalion, with air support and artillery support from the main combat base, attacked. And that battle went on from dawn till noon. My company was in a base of fire position, providing supporting fire to Alpha Company and Bravo and Charlie as they attacked the hill. About 10 o'clock that morning, I got a call to come down and help with the casualties. So I moved from Delta Company across open space, and fortunately no one was shooting at me, and moved over to where the Alpha Company had set up its company aid station. And I helped treat casualties for about 2 hours there until all of my supplies were expended. And then after that, I went back to the battalion aid station, got resupplied, and joined Delta. The next morning, the NVA counterattacked our position, and we defended that. And we spent a couple of days then resting, recuperating, getting resupplied. And then we moved across the valley again and attacked Hill, I think it's 558, and There was only a few enemy soldiers on that position, but they were defending it, and Delta had the lead that day, and we went up that hill and took that hill with only a couple of minor casualties, fortunately. And then the very next day, we attacked along the ridgeline to this 681, and there were no enemy on that hill, but they had obviously been there for a long time. We found trenches and bunkers with all kinds of ammunition and medical supplies stored in there. They had been using it as a base to attack out of when we were over on the main combat base. And we spent several days there inventorying and evacuating all of that stuff so it couldn't be retaken. On Easter Sunday, we had a mass on the reverse slope of that hill. The Catholic chaplain was there. And that was the first time we'd had church since Christmas in the field, in my company anyway. I can't speak for everyone else. And when the Mass was over, we were watching the 1st Air Cavalry Division was attacking a hill across the valley, and it looked pretty cool because the hill was getting peppered with artillery. You could see the dust flying and stuff, and then the helicopters would land before the dust even cleared. And it really looked like a very cool way to attack. We were envious of them not having to do all that walking that we did.
So we left off, we talked about the Catholic Mass, seeing the hill that was peppered with artillery and everything. Right. You stayed in country till June, July?
Yeah, I need to give you this next bit.
Oh, please,
This is the biggest battle I was in.
Oh, sure.
So it was the morning of April 16, 1968. We were scheduled to move to the southeast along a ridgeline that the Arvin Airborne Regiment had occupied the previous day. And our Alpha Company led out along that ridgeline, and they walked into a horseshoe ambush by the NVA. And the NVA was being supported by 152 millimeter artillery from Laos. And so our Alpha Company got pretty hard hit. Our battalion commander initially thought Alpha could fight its way out because he didn't at the time understand the level of preparedness that the enemy had achieved, and he let them battle probably on their own a little too long. As an aside, he was later relieved of command based on what happened this day. Charlie Company then he employed to attack that position from the south to relieve pressure on Alpha Company, and that attack stalled. And then he employed Delta Company and from the north, and our attack stalled. As we were headed up in our attack, the enemy fire was intense, low crawling along. I got notified that the battalion commander had been wounded, and there was no corpsman near him, so I got pulled off from Delta Company to go over, and I treated. He had 2 wounds, one in his arm and one in his thigh. Neither one was serious. I just put a battle dressing on, and he said he was good to go, and I went back looking for my unit. I was separated at that time. I was by myself, and I'm crawling up the hill, and I see this NVA soldier pop out and point his rifle right at me. Somebody else saw him and shot him. I don't know who shot him, no idea. I crawled up to the fighting position he was in, I pulled him out, and I got down inside, and I just took a moment. It took, I'm not sure how long the moment was. It wasn't a very long time, but that was a real heart-stopping moment, though, because he was putting his rifle aim right at me when he got shot. I left that hole and I found my Delta Company headquarters group, and we're continuing to move up the hill on our bellies, and enemy fire is overhead, and I encountered the forward observer for the air support, and he'd been wounded. He had a sucking chest wound. So I pulled him into a bomb crater, and I bandaged him up, and I saw another Delta 19 Marine sergeant. I can't remember his name, but he jumped up and he started to run forward, and he got hit. So the FO's RTO said, "I'll go get him and bring him back." So he left the bomb crater, and he came back and dragged in the wounded sergeant. And just as I was going to treat him, I was squatting in the bomb crater. A hand grenade got tossed in by the bad guys. I'm assuming because if it had been an American hand grenade, it would have killed us all. And the grenade went off. I was knocked unconscious. I was wounded in several places in my right thigh. The FO radio telephone operator was killed. The sergeant that he went to get was also dead. But somehow the FO himself hadn't gotten any other injuries. I didn't realize I was hit at first, and I moved to go to check on the others, and I collapsed because of the injury to my leg. And I bandaged myself, and then I treated the FO, and I said, "I'm going to send you down to the battalion aid station for evacuation. Do you know where it is?" And he said, "No." And so I decided to drag him down there myself. And so I dragged him down the hill to where the battalion casualties were being collected. And there were so many wounded there that hadn't even been treated, that they had just dragged themselves there, that I stayed down in that area and continued treating wounded Marines until dark. So, this started at dawn, and it went all day, this firefight, with enemy artillery and friendly artillery. And
You're wounded for most of this.
I'm wounded for most of the day. They sent helicopters in to do medevacs, and 2 were shot down by the enemy. And then, so they didn't send any more till after dark. And they finally came in after dark, and I helped load casualties onto helicopters until finally I figured it was my turn to get off. And so I joined up and got on a helicopter and got medevac to Dong Ha. So, on that day, the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines had 55 killed in action, and 70 wounded, and 15 missing. And that place became known as MIA Hill within the 3rd Marine Division in 19 history, because we didn't take our bodies with us that day. We had to go back and pick them up. And that's not like the Marine Corps. Nobody left behind, and that take it very seriously. After that, I was treated and recovered. It wasn't a serious wound. I still have 3 pieces of shrapnel in my left femur, but I went back to Delta Company after a couple of weeks in the rear, and immediately got into another firefight on April 29th at Cam Low. This is the one that I still have nightmares about, Rick, every now and then, because we got caught in the open, rice paddies, and every time I moved, people were shooting at me. And you're moving from one wounded Marine to the next, trying to do your job. And in that particular battle, Delta Company lost 10 killed in action that day. And it was a tough day. The next tough day for me in Vietnam was on Memorial Day that year. The battalion chaplain, we were at Cam Low, the battalion chaplain got 38, no, that's not right. I can't remember the number, but he had like 150 pairs of boots that he put on the parade field. And then he read the names of everyone who'd been killed in action, and they played taps continuously throughout that whole ceremony on Memorial Day in 1968. And I wept uncontrollably throughout the whole thing. And even today, when I hear taps, it bothers me, and I get emotional over it. And that turned out to be my last act with Delta Company. I got orders to go to the 3rd Medical Battalion, and I spent the rest of my tour at the hospital level in Fubai and then later at Quangtree.
A lot of men tell me when they leave a unit like that to go back to the rear, there's like a sense of loss. Like you guys are still out there, but you're back. Did you have anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. That you were relieved that you were going to a safer place, but you had a lot of guilt feelings about leaving your friends and your buddies behind in the unit. And that was amplified for me actually in mid-June of '68 when I was working triage in Fubai, and we had a bunch of our 19 Marines came in to the hospital and had to treat them and talk to them about what had happened to them, and they were in the Ashaw Valley. That was a fight that they were in the Ashaw Valley that I missed, and that was a tough day for me.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about coming home from Vietnam and the issues that you faced getting back to the war.
Well, I returned home the first day or two of November of 1968, and my travel back home to Rhode Island was without incident. I traveled in uniform, and most of the people I encountered were friendly at that point. My dad and my girlfriend's mom organized a welcome home party, which was pretty cool. And knowing how others were received at home, it was very cool in retrospect, you know. Then I had another assignment at Quantico, Virginia. I went down to the Marine Corps base there and was teaching first aid to the officer candidates. And while I was there, I didn't really have a big issue with anything because I was focused, still doing the job kind of a thing. And then I left the service, active service, to go to college. And first week on campus, this girl approached me and said, "How come you're so old?" You know, I'm 22 years old. It's very old on a college campus at that time. And I said, "Well, I was in Vietnam." And she spit right in my face. And you kept encountering people that called you baby killers, and you know, there was all of the news about the anti-war protests and all of the negative press that was going on, and it was pretty ugly. And at that time, I began to suffer some effects of we didn't know what to call it at the time, but post-traumatic stress disorder. Initially, loud noise, startle effect. I mean, I would be walking down the streets of Providence and a car would backfire, which they did in those days. They don't much anymore. And I would find myself face down on the sidewalk. Just an instantaneous response to that. That went away over time. Not a long time either, a few months maybe. But I suffered from nightmares, periodic nightmares for a long time, several years. And it wasn't really until I met my wife, Dorothy, now married over 50 years, that she would comfort me when I woke up at night and tell me, "Hey, you're safe here," and all of that stuff. And I moved on with that. And also, I read the book Catch-22, and it struck a chord with me, where Catch-22 is defined. If you're afraid, you're normal and can leave combat. If you're not afraid and want to go to combat, you're crazy. you can't only be taken out of combat if you're crazy. So if you're afraid, and then you're normal, and so you got to go to war. And it kind of made sense to me, the Catch-22 thing, and it helped me process the emotions and the feelings that I had that were driving the PTSD, and I moved on from it, thank God. And I know a lot of my friends haven't.
And you decided to enlist in the Army shortly after that?
Well, in college I did, it sounds crazy sometimes, especially when you mention the PTSD and the fact that you were wounded in battle, but I loved being a soldier and a Marine, a corpsman, whatever you want to call it. And so I went through Army ROTC, and I chose the Army because the Marine Corps wouldn't guarantee me a commission. I would have had to go to officer candidate school. And I didn't want to take the chance on not getting a commission. So I did ROTC, and I got commissioned in the Army, and I loved serving in the Army. I was an infantryman, and I liked the physical and mental challenge that being an infantry officer provided. And I had a good career of it. And I don't know if we're wrapping up, I know, but I wanted to mention my next war because it was so different. In 1990, I was assigned to United States Space Command, and I was within the United States Space Command. I was given an assignment in the Space Defense Center in Cheyenne Mountain, and my job was classified. But the unclassified version was that I was taking information that we received from classified satellites and processing that information. And during the Gulf War, in Desert Shield and Desert Storm, I was relaying that information within seconds of receiving it to the combat leadership in the Gulf. And what a difference a war is when you're getting shot at and when you're sitting inside a bunker 4,000 miles away. It's a much more pleasant second war for me than the first one.
And tactically, I'm sure all those satellites were extremely beneficial because things like 73 Eastings and all of that were just absolute victories.
Yeah.
So, very cool.
Yeah, it was.
So a couple other questions to wrap us up today. What do you want people to remember about Vietnam based on all your experiences out there?
Well, I think that what the American people has learned since Vietnam is the takeaway that I think is that the American soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen that fought in that war were doing so on behalf of their nation, and they fought bravely. We were doing what the politicians asked us to do, and whether the war was right or whether it was wrong was not our choice or our decision. We did it to the best of our ability.
Now, is there any song that if you heard it today would take you back to your days with 1-9 and your days in Vietnam?
Actually, there is not. The music, we didn't have radios in the field, and so listened to some music when I was in the 3rd Medical Battalion. People had reel-to-reel tape recorders in those days, and I could probably come up with a song or two, but none are really truly memorable for me.
Sure. Now, in your military career, either in the Navy, serving with the Marines, or in the Army, is there any leader who made a big impact on your life?
There were a couple of people like that. So as a rifle company commander in the 3rd Infantry Division in Germany, my battalion commander was a guy named C.V. Bain, and he was a mentor for sure. His attention to detail, his concern for the soldiers, and his concern for doing the mission right packaged that very much like Frank Schaefer did for me in Vietnam. I learned so much from C.V. Bain. Then later in life, I worked as an assistant to the Chief of Staff at U.S. Northern Command, the Major General Paul Sullivan. Fantastic leader, fantastic human being. Got things done without making people feel like they were being pushed down the road. He led them down the road,
And lastly, any final thoughts or words of advice to anybody watching this in the future? Kids, grandkids, students?
Well, I don't know about a word of advice, but I think serving your nation is an important thing, and if you have an opportunity to do that, you'll benefit from it.
Well, I cannot thank you enough, Bill, for taking the time to share your stories with me. It's really an honor and a pleasure, but most importantly, I want to thank you so much for your service. Greatly appreciate you, sir.
Thank you.